Most of the major candidates already in New Hampshire trying to rally voters for next Tuesday's primary. Trump looking to bounce back, Rubio looking to get a big bounce, and Hillary Clinton to pull out at this point what will be an unexpected win. Now, here to hash it all out, Washington Post national political correspondent James Hohmann. You know, as we look to New Hampshire, looking for a few signals we can take from Iowa, including turnout. I know you wrote about that today. Record turnout, especially on the GOP side. What, if anything, should we extrapolate for that going forward?
This is a fluid race that is drawing a lot of interest and excitement. One of the things that is surprising is about half the people who showed up at the Republican caucuses in Iowa were first-time voters, but the conventional wisdom had been that those people would break overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. In fact, Trump hardly won that group. Marco Rubio did really well. Ted Cruz won about a fifth of them. So, you know, I think there are a lot of new voters who are going to come out. The big question to extrapolate it forward to New Hampshire is that it's very different. Obviously, it's a primary instead of a caucus. A caucus, you have to show up on a snowy night, invest an hour or two of your time. The primary, you can go anytime all day, but New Hampshire also has an open primary, so independents can decide whether they want to get ballots on the Democratic side or the Republican side. After last night, both races look particularly interesting, so it's a hard choice. You know, do you want to vote in the Hillary-Bernie race, or do you want to pick for Trump versus someone else? And that really is the big question that I think will determine the outcome. And last night showed that a lot of people who could go either way are going to take a Republican ballot.
To that end, and speaking of Trump, first of all, there was actual humility at the end, which in and of itself is a story. But more than that, if there were anything that he can take away from Iowa that, you know, lessons learned, including probably campaigning in that state until the actual caucus instead of leaving when he did for New Hampshire. Moreover, figuring out what you're doing when you go to the offertory basket maybe or getting communion. What are the takeaways, James, seriously, that he's going to do it differently for New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada down the line? Do you think there's lessons that he can take from Iowa and push beyond?
There are lots of lessons he can take from Iowa, Richard. You know, Donald Trump needs to learn campaigns matter. Organizations matter. You cannot win a presidential campaign through free media that you get by going on cable news and talking. You have to build a ground game, a field operation to get your supporters out. The ground game for Trump in Iowa lagged behind. It was not a serious effort. In fact, looking at the campaign finance reports from the last quarter, Donald Trump's camp spent more on hats that said "Make America Great Again" than they did on voter mobilization and persuasion in Iowa. I think that is very, very telling. And, you know, Trump just wasn't doing the mechanical things that you have to do to win a presidential campaign. We had talked for the last couple of weeks. Maybe the rules don't apply anymore or in 2016 or to Donald Trump. But what Iowa showed us is the rules still very much apply.
The establishment candidates got crushed last night. And I even wonder, beyond Huckabee, how many are going to make it really through New Hampshire? To that end, Chris Christie, 10th place. I mean, Jeb Bush here. I mean, who would have thought a few months ago, James, it would have been this bad? I mean, Ben Carson, remember? I mean, how much of a national story it was? As you report, he's going back to Florida to take a few days off, to say the least here. He's not a serious candidate anymore. My gosh, this thing really could be winnowed down to 4 or 5 guys come Tuesday evening, right?
Yeah, even more so. Ben Carson said he's going back to Florida because he needs a change of clothes. That's why he's going off the campaign trail. Regardless of why these guys are not dropping out, the fact is they're non-factors. Rick Santorum didn't drop out last night like Mike Huckabee, but he's not a factor anymore. He's going straight to South Carolina. I think New Hampshire is going to give us a lot of clarity. Right now, there still is a 4-way race for the establishment nod in New Hampshire. John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, blew off Iowa the last couple of weeks. He's been focused full-time on New Hampshire. He actually got more support in Iowa than Chris Christie, who spent the last several days in Iowa, got. I think that's devastating for Christie. But basically, over the next week, there's going to be this shadow boxing between Kasich and Christie and Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio for who's going to be the establishment favorite. And I think if Rubio does as well in New Hampshire next Tuesday as he did in Iowa yesterday, it's going to be very hard for Kasich and Christie to go on.
All right, James, let's pivot to the Democrats. I saw your note today. You mentioned what a lot of people do in the analogy with our friend Bill Murray, Groundhog Day. 2008 all over again for Hillary, but it was such a different feel 8 years ago because there was this movement, if you will. Bernie Sanders, I mean, a guy with a Brooklyn accent from Vermont. I know the very liberal wing of the party liked him, but was this more of an indictment on Hillary than it was an embrace of Bernie?
Yeah, no question. And one of the big challenges, Richard, that Bernie has is that people still don't think he's in it to win it. I think people who are supporting Bernie, not all of them, but a lot of them want to send a message that they're not ready for Hillary, that they don't trust her, that they don't want this to be a coronation, that they want a real debate about issues like income inequality. But now Bernie Sanders has raised, $75 million. He's trying to build a serious national campaign. He's trying to convince people that he's viable and electable. In his stump speech now, he actually talks about polls as much as Donald Trump does, which is to say he makes the case that he could actually compete in a general election against the Republicans. That's his challenge going forward, is to say, look, I may not comb my hair, but I'm someone who could be the Democratic nominee. People, initially didn't see Barack Obama as a credible candidate to be the Democratic nominee or to be president, but he assuaged those doubts over time, and he certainly helped assuage those doubts with his win in Iowa.
Hypothetically, John Podesta, who's obviously a major player in the Hillary Clinton campaign, calls you up, James, and he says, all right, look, I got all this competing data here. From non-white voters, they're still clearly in Hillary's camp. You look at our national campaign and where we're positioned and the institutional support that we carried over from the Obama team, let alone all the people we've assembled, we're positioned here for a national candidacy. Do I still stick, James, with this, electability argument? Do I over-panic and read too much into Iowa? What would your advice to the Clinton camp be today?
Well, playing it safe has sort of paid off for Hillary Clinton. There are a lot of open question marks, but I don't think she should change her strategy too much. They've stuck with their playbook. I think it worked for them. Obviously, a win is a win in Iowa. She won by a handful of delegates, but she's obviously going to have to retool. But the fundamentals make the reality this: Hillary Clinton is the still overwhelming frontrunner to be the Democratic nominee, and she's the underdog going into the New Hampshire primary, but she's well positioned in South Carolina and Nevada, the two states after, and then the string of states on March 1st, the so-called SEC primary for the Southeastern Conference.
Yep.
A bunch of southern states with large African-American populations where she remains incredibly popular. We'll see if those numbers start to move now that Iowa has happened, but I think she's still pretty well positioned. There's reason to sweat, though. Iowa should be a wake-up call that this is going to be a marathon and not a coronation. But I don't think that they're panicking in Brooklyn.
James Homan, I hope to speak to you as this campaign season fully gets into swing.
Absolutely, really fun to talk with you.
All right, let's bring in our panel right now. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Stephen Rothman, former Democratic congressman from New Jersey. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And we're talking about New Hampshire. Andrew's going to be making his way up to New Hampshire not too long from now. But if you're Hillary Clinton, she said last night with a big sigh of relief, but really the perception, which is in many cases more important than reality, is that Bernie Sanders overachieved expectations and going into New Hampshire, which would be a huge surprise if he wasn't the winner going away. Who would have thought this kind of momentum this early? Caucus said it's not a coronation it's going to be a dragged out fight, but would she sign up for that right now? That this would be a dragged out primary, that she still wins at the end? Or does she have legitimate reasons to think that she could actually not be the nominee?
Well, anything can happen. There are silly rumors about whether she would be indicted over emails. I don't think she will. She says those emails weren't labeled confidential or classified or top secret when she sent them out on her server. But yeah, she and her group are worried. They know her favorables or rather her unfavorables are really high. although people do understand she's supremely qualified in terms of her experience as First Lady, U.S. Senator, and U.S. Secretary of State. There are very few people who enter these kind of contests for president with her credentials.
It seems, Congressman, that the electability argument that she keeps making, that in this election cycle is almost a negative. People want outsiders. People want people that haven't been captive, in their words, to the political system. What would have been the person most ready for that 3 a.m. phone call is almost now a debit instead of a credit on the ledger.
Richard, I hear you, and I'm aware of the anger and frustration of a lot of people about the stagnation in their wages and in the economy. But America, compared to all our competitors, is doing well, and people are going to realize at the end of this process that we live in a hostile, dangerous world, and we need people with smarts and experience and common sense and good judgment. And at the end of this long marathon of marathons, she may still come out on top.
You're going to get into the calendar, Andrew, and also some of the math in terms of Iowa and New Hampshire not reflective of what South Carolina, Nevada, and Super Tuesday is going to look like. But would you tell the people within Camp Hillary, if they're nervous, just take a deep breath, it's going to be fine? Or would you say, you got a reason to be worried? Maybe it's time to change the message.
I think there's reason for concern, but I think she's in fine position. And I think the biggest goal was don't lose Iowa, because she's probably going to lose New Hampshire. And then if she lost the first 2 contests, the narrative would have been it's 2008 all over again. There's an upstart and it's all slipping away from Hillary one more time. Now, she didn't win by a lot. They basically came to a tie in Iowa, but a tie is good enough for a win for Hillary, because now she will not begin this process by losing the first 2 primaries or caucuses. She is still better positioned in Nevada, which follows New Hampshire, and then South Carolina, than Bernie Sanders is. And then Super Tuesday, she should be in position to clean up. So would she have liked to have beaten Bernie Sanders by more in Iowa yesterday? Absolutely. But is there reason for panic? I don't think so. I think, and now she's the underdog in New Hampshire, and all that she has there is upside. If she wins or comes close, then she's defeated expectations, and she's the comeback kid. And when have we heard that from a Clinton in New Hampshire before?
Well, Dom, we go to the Republican side.
Okay.
And I have not remembered a time where people in our line of work haven't known to make heads or tails out of somebody as much as Donald Trump. And do we believe the polls? Do we not believe the polls? You know, how many people are going to turn out here? Oh, if they turn out, that's great for Trump. Well, this is what we know. A lot of people turned out. A record number of Republicans turned out. That was supposed to help Trump. Not so much. Apparently, the 11th hour voters here who couldn't make up their mind, they didn't break for Trump. They either broke for Cruz or even more so for Rubio right now. How much of the balloon of Trump, of the inflated expectations he was going to run the table, has been popped? Or do we all just flip-flop again, and when Andrew's talking to us from Manchester, never mind, Trump wins big in New Hampshire and he's off to a big Super Tuesday?
I love the analogy, because that's exactly the way I would describe it in terms of the balloon. At least for the next 7 to 8 days, someone took a sharp needle and went to the balloon and said, pop, because the argument that you're invincible, that you're the man, that you don't lose, that's for little people. Little regular people lose, not Donald Trump. Pop. So he's expected to win New Hampshire. The question is, what type of bounce momentum does Cruz is not going to do well in New Hampshire. So Donald Trump can regain his claim, but I dare say, and he's got, he can stay on forever, but this might be the beginning of he's a mere mortal like the rest of us.
Let me just add to the pop, maybe.
Yeah.
Because Trump has absolutely defeated every expectation we've had in this race so far. So maybe the air comes out of the balloon. Then again, maybe not.
Congressman, one of the things that was argued, all the traditional conventions of a campaign, about paid advertising, about structured ground game, about having precinct commanders, about people were like, that was then, this is now. Was last night a rebuke to that modern notion that you don't need that stuff? Do the same old rules apply, which was Rubio had, and certainly Cruz, they were there a lot longer. They did more retail politics. It wasn't just the big events. They showed up for all the fairs, and they pressed the flesh, and they showed up for all the debates. They had every precinct commander in all 99 precincts. They did all those things. that you kind of have to do that as much as people say it's antiquated. Is that, do you think, one of the explainers as to why Trump just didn't meet expectations last night?
Well, I think you need both things. I think you're right. You need to cover your back by doing the traditional things about organizing the state district by district and precinct leaders, etc. But you also have to take advantage of what's new and marketable, and Donald Trump did that, and Bernie Sanders did that too, although he had quite a great organization, albeit he got it set up in a hurry. But this year is wide open for everybody. Yep. And by the way, just because somebody wins the Iowa caucus doesn't mean they're going to be president. No. As we know, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee on the Republican side, they won the Iowa caucuses. They didn't become the nominee or the president. And on the Democrat side, Al Gore and John Kerry won the Iowa caucuses. They didn't win the presidency. So we have a very long way to go. Iowa was really only 2.5% of the total of votes that one would need to win the respective conventions. We got a long way to go.
All right. Coming up next, though, Iowa and New Hampshire always first. But does that mean they have a huge role in deciding who wins the White House? I think the congressman addressed that. We're going to take a look back and discuss whether or not history can guide us about the future and to lay out the map that lies ahead.